Sometimes, the moment your life falls apart is the same moment you start to find yourself again. Friends, this is Lydia's story of silence, discovery, and the quiet courage to begin again. At 49, I thought I finally had everything figured out. The morning light poured softly through the curtains of our home in Portland, painting the kitchen in gold. Lydia Moore, that's me, stirred her coffee slowly, her movements precise, almost rehearsed. She had always loved mornings. The quiet, the order. A moment before the world demanded her attention. Her husband, Martin, shuffled into the kitchen wearing his usual flannel robe, holding his phone. "Morning," he mumbled, barely glancing up. "Morning," Lydia replied, forcing a small smile. She had stopped expecting real conversations before 9 a.m. Their twins, Evan and Grace, both 23, were already seated at the island, heads bent over glowing screens, earbuds in, living in their separate worlds. "Did you both get the email from Aunt Dora about the reunion?" Lydia asked. Grace didn't look up. "Yeah. But flights to Montana are ridiculous right now. Maybe next year." Evan shrugged. "Same." Lydia nodded quietly. She'd expected that answer. Family gatherings had long since become her personal crusade, something the others tolerated rather than enjoyed. Martin poured himself coffee and scrolled through his messages. "I might be late tonight," he said casually. "New client dinner." Lydia wanted to ask which client or where, but experience had taught her the futility. He'd only answer vaguely, and she'd be left pretending not to notice. Instead, she smiled thinly. "All right." As she cleaned the counter, her phone buzzed. A message from her old friend, Marianne, popped up. "Lunch today. Need to talk. Urgent." Lydia hesitated. She hadn't seen Marianne in months, not since her own life had turned upside down. But she replied, "Of course. Noon at our usual place." After everyone left, Martin to his office, the twins to their respective jobs, the house fell into that perfect, aching silence that Lydia both loved and feared. She moved slowly to her study, a tidy little corner lined with books and framed photos. Their wedding day, the twins' graduation, family trips frozen in perfect smiles. Everything looked beautiful. Everything felt hollow. Marianne was already seated by the window when Lydia arrived at the cafe. She looked different, thinner, tired, eyes carrying something heavy. "Lydia," as she said, standing to hug her. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," Lydia smiled gently. "You said it was urgent." They ordered tea and sandwiches. For a few minutes, they danced around small talk, kids, weather, work, the usual armor of middle-aged friendship. But Marianne's hands trembled slightly as she stirred her drink. Finally, she looked up. "Lydia, I need to tell you something. And I hate that I'm the one saying it." Lydia's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Marianne hesitated, eyes glistening. "It's Martin." The sound of her husband's name, spoken so softly, so carefully, made Lydia's heart tighten. Marianne continued, "He has been seeing someone. For a while now. I thought maybe it was a rumor, but I've seen them. Together. Twice." The cafe noise seemed to fade into a muffled blur, cups clinking, low laughter, the hum of a coffee machine far away. All Lydia could hear was her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears. She didn't speak. Didn't cry. Just nodded slowly, as if her body needed a moment to catch up with what her mind already knew. How long? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marianne swallowed hard. A year, maybe more. A pause. Then Marianne reached across the table. I'm so sorry, Lydia. Lydia managed a faint, polite smile. The same one she wore at PTA meetings, charity dinners, funerals. It's all right, she said quietly. Thank you for telling me. But inside, something cracked, not loudly, not violently, but deep and final, like the quiet snap of a frozen branch. That night, she cooked dinner as always. The same roast chicken, the same table, the same clinking of forks against plates. No one noticed anything different. Martin complimented the meal. Grace asked for the car keys. Evan laughed at something on his phone. And Lydia smiled, like always. But under the table, her hands were trembling. After everyone had gone to bed, she sat in the dark living room with a glass of wine. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. She opened her laptop. Typed his name into the search bar, not because she expected to find proof, but because she needed to see something, anything, that made this nightmare tangible. And there it was. A photo, a charity gala from 2 months ago. Martin, smiling, arm around a younger woman. The caption read, Architect Martin Moore and Associate Designer Elise Dalton at the Evergreen Foundation dinner. Associate Designer. Lydia stared at the screen, her reflection flickering faintly in the glass. Then, very calmly, she closed the laptop, finished her wine, and whispered to the empty room. Enough. The following morning, Lydia woke before dawn. The house was still, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of the rain. She moved through the kitchen without turning on the lights, her bare feet silent against the tile. For years, she had built her mornings around routine. Coffee, music, emails, chores, a comforting choreography of predictability. But now, each small movement felt foreign, hollow. When Martin appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie, she looked up briefly. You're up early, he said, pouring himself coffee. Couldn't sleep, as she replied. He nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. That familiar distance, it was almost theatrical now. A performance of domestic normalcy. Lydia watched him. The way he checked his reflection in the microwave. The way he avoided her eyes. And for the first time, she didn't feel heartbreak. She felt clarity. When he left, she stood there for a long while, staring at the door as it closed behind him. Then, she whispered to herself, I'm not disappearing for him. By afternoon, Lydia was in her studio, a small room she once used for watercolor painting, though she hadn't touched a brush in years. She opened the closet and found her old box of supplies, brushes stiff with dust, tubes of dried pigment, sketch pads yellowed at the edges. Her hands trembled as she set them out. Not from sadness, but something close to anticipation. She filled a glass jar with water, pressed the first brush to the page, and let color bleed across the surface, soft, imperfect, alive. It wasn't about beauty. It was about movement. About proving to herself that she still existed. Hours passed. The light shifted. And by the time the sun dipped below the trees, Lydia's table was covered in small, chaotic paintings, storms of blue, red, and gold. When Grace came home, she stopped at the doorway. Mom, what's all this? Lydia smiled, eyes bright for the first time in years. Just making a mess, as she said softly. Over the next few weeks, small changes took root. She stopped waiting for Martin's texts. She went walking at sunrise, even when it rained. She enrolled in a local art workshop, told no one. She started laughing again, not the polite kind, but the sudden, reckless kind that startled her kids. And though she never confronted Martin outright, something in her silence began to unsettle him. He noticed the new lightness in her tone. The way she no longer asked about his day. The way she smiled without needing a reason. "One night," he said, "you've been different lately." Lydia looked up from her sketchbook. "I think I finally stopped waiting for life to go back to normal," she said. Then, with a calm that disarmed him completely, she added, "And maybe that's a good thing." Spring arrived quietly that year. The cherry trees along their street bloomed all at once, soft clouds of pink against a pale sky. Lydia stood by the window one morning, watching petals drift across the driveway like snow. It felt like the world was reminding her that even endings could be beautiful. She'd rented a small studio downtown, a sunlit space above a florist's shop, smelling faintly of lavender and old wood. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Her own name on the lease. Her own key. At first, she painted alone, still timid, still unsure. But slowly, people began to notice. A gallery owner wandered in one afternoon and stood silently before her work, layered abstracts of rain and light and quiet defiance. "Who did these?" he asked. "I did," Lydia said simply. He smiled. "They feel honest." That night, she told her twins over dinner. Evan looked surprised. Grace grinned. "Mom, that's amazing. You should totally do it," she said. Martin said nothing at first. Then, after a long pause, he murmured, "I didn't know you were painting again." Lydia smiled softly. "I didn't either." There was no accusation in her tone, no bitterness. Just truth. Weeks later, her first small exhibit opened. A handful of friends came, some old, some new. Marianne stood proudly in the corner, eyes glistening. Lydia walked through the gallery, surrounded by color, her colors, and realized she didn't need anyone's permission to exist fully anymore. Each painting held a fragment of her story, the ache, the silence, the slow rebuilding. And as she stood there, a stranger approached her, a woman around her age, kind eyes, gentle smile. "Your work," the woman said, "it feels like healing." Lydia nodded. "It is." Later that night, she drove home under a silver blue moon. The house was quiet, the air still. Martin was in his study, working late as usual. She paused at the doorway, watching him. For a moment, she felt a flicker of the old tenderness, the life they had built, the years they had shared. Then she said softly, "Martin, I'm going to Montana next week. The family reunion." He looked up, surprised. "Alone?" "Yes," she said. "Alone." He hesitated, then nodded. "You should go." And for the first time in a long time, they both meant what they said. The next morning, Lydia packed lightly, sketchbooks, brushes, a single photograph of her children. Before she left, she paused at the doorway, sunlight spilling across the floorboards. She whispered, not as a goodbye, but as a promise. "I'm still here." Then she stepped outside, the sound of the door clicking softly behind her. And the screen faded to white. "Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story." On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.